The 911 call comes in at 7:52 in the evening on July 15th, 2008. The woman on the line is not the mother of the missing child. She is the grandmother. Her voice carries something that most dispatchers recognize immediately. Not panic, not grief, but a specific kind of controlled desperation. The voice of someone who has been holding something back for a very long time and has finally reached the moment where holding back is no longer possible. She tells the dispatcher that her granddaughter has been missing for 31 days. 31 days. Not 31 hours, not 31 minutes. 31 days, during which the child's mother, her own daughter, told her the little girl was with a nanny, with friends, at the beach, at Universal Studios, somewhere that was never quite the same place twice, and never a place anyone could verify, and never a place where a 2-year-old child named Caylee Anthony actually was. By the time that call ends, the case is already broken in ways that will take years to fully understand. Because the question that will drive everything that follows, every police interview, every search, every trial, every verdict, is not simply where Caylee went. It is why her mother waited 31 days to tell anyone she was gone. And perhaps more unsettling than that, what a person does with 31 days when the answer to that question is something they cannot afford to speak aloud. To understand how a family arrives at that phone call, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, not the moment anything went wrong, but the ordinary one. The kind of beginning that looks, from the outside, like any other young family trying to hold itself together in the particular pressurized way that families in suburban Florida sometimes do. Close quarters, shared finances, the slow erosion of privacy that comes when 3 generations share a single address. Orlando, Florida, summer of 2005. Caylee Anthony is 19 years old, living with her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, in a beige stucco house on Hope Spring Drive in the suburb of Orange County. The house is modest and well kept, a 2-story home in a quiet residential neighborhood where the lawns are mowed on schedule and the neighbors know each other's cars by sight. By any measure, the street is unremarkable, the kind of place where sprinklers run on timers and people wave from their driveways without stopping to talk. George Anthony is a former law enforcement officer, methodical and quiet. A man who spent years reading situations and people, and who, in the years ahead, will be confronted with the possibility that he completely misread the person closest to him. Cindy Anthony is a registered nurse, organized and determined, and by most accounts of people who knew the family during this period, the emotional center of gravity around which everything else orbited. She is the one who keeps the household running. She is the one who manages the calendar, the finances, the relationships. She is, in the language that people who knew her tend to use, someone who holds things together through sheer force of will. Caylee is their youngest child. She is, by nearly everyone's description from that period, beautiful and social and charming in the way that makes people want to believe her. She is also, by the same accounts, someone for whom the boundary between a story and the truth was never particularly firm. She had told her parents she was attending Valencia Community College, a 2-year institution about 12 miles from the family home. She was not enrolled there. She had told them she was working at Universal Studios Orlando, the theme park on Universal Boulevard, where she had previously held a job. She had not worked there in years. These were not small omissions. They were sustained, detailed performances maintained over months, sometimes years, that required constant maintenance and regular improvisation, the kind of lying that is exhausting to sustain and that, when it finally collapses, tends to collapse all at once. In the summer of 2005, Caylee becomes pregnant. The father is later identified as Jesse Grund, a young man she had been dating, though the question of paternity will be complicated in ways that ultimately matter less to the case than the simple fact of what happens next. On August 9th, 2005, Caylee Marie Anthony is born at Winnie Palmer Hospital in Orlando, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces. She is small and dark-haired, and from the photographs that will eventually be seen by the entire country, luminously happy in the way that some very young children are, the kind of child who smiles with her whole face, who reaches toward the camera, who seems, in every image, to be fully present in a way that makes her absence, later, feel like a physical thing. The early years are, by the accounts of neighbors and family friends, genuinely warm. Cindy Anthony is devoted to Caylee in a way that is immediately visible to anyone who spends time around them. She takes Caylee to the park, reads to her in the evenings, documents her milestones with the thoroughness of someone who understands that children grow fast and that the small moments disappear before you know they're gone. George Anthony dotes on her with the particular tenderness of a grandfather who has found in this small person something uncomplicated to love. Caylee, for her part, is photographed constantly with her daughter, at birthday parties, at the beach, in the backyard of the Hope Spring Drive house, in pose pictures that suggest a closeness that the people who took them believed was real. There is one photograph in particular, taken at Caylee's second birthday party in August of 2007, that circulates widely during the investigation. Caylee is holding Caylee on her lap. Both of them are laughing. It is the kind of image that makes what comes next harder to process, not easier. But underneath the surface of those photographs, the structure of Caylee's life is becoming increasingly unstable. She is not working in any consistent capacity. She is not enrolled in school. She is borrowing money from friends. Small amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there, always with a specific and plausible sounding reason, and then larger amounts, and then, in the months before Caylee disappears, she is stealing from her own parents and from her close friend Amy Huizenga, forging checks against Huizenga's bank account, draining a total of approximately $700 over several weeks, maintaining the appearance of a functional adult life entirely through deception. The money goes toward gas, toward clothing, toward the ordinary expenses of someone living a life they cannot actually afford. By the spring of 2008, the relationship between Cindy and Caylee has deteriorated to the point of open conflict. Cindy has begun to suspect, or perhaps to know, that something is fundamentally wrong, that the job at Universal doesn't exist, that the money keeps disappearing, that Caylee's explanations no longer hold together under even light scrutiny. There are arguments in the house on Hope Spring Drive, loud enough that neighbors will later recall hearing raised voices. There is a moment documented in trial testimony where Cindy tells someone close to her that she is considering seeking legal guardianship of Caylee, a step that would effectively remove Caylee from her own daughter's day-to-day life. Whether Caylee knew about this specific conversation is not established, but the tension in the household during these months is, by every account, significant and building. On June 16, 2008, Caylee Anthony is seen alive for the last time. The The last confirmed sighting is at the Hope Spring Drive house in the early morning hours. George Anthony later testifies that Casey and Caylee left together that morning, sometime around 12:50 in the afternoon, that Caylee was wearing a pink shirt and carrying her small backpack, the one with the cartoon character on the front that she carried everywhere, and that as they backed out of the driveway, Caylee turned and waved at him from the back seat of the car. He waves back. He watches the car until it rounds the corner and disappears. It is the last time he will ever see his granddaughter alive, and he does not know it yet, and this is the detail that George Anthony will return to in interviews and in testimony, more than almost any other, that last wave and what it meant and what he didn't know it meant. What happens next? In the hours and days immediately following June 16th is one of the most exhaustively examined periods in the history of American true crime, and it is also one of the least understood, because the only person who was present for all of it is Caylee Anthony, and Caylee Anthony has given multiple mutually contradictory accounts of every significant moment. She has changed her story in ways both large and small, and the investigators who spent months trying to establish a coherent timeline of those days will ultimately conclude that a coherent timeline may not exist, that what happened on and after June 16th exists, for the purposes of the legal record, only in fragments and inference. What the evidence does show is this. In the days following June 16th, Caylee Anthony does not go home to Hope Spring Drive. She does not report her daughter missing to anyone. She does not call the police or a hospital or a family member or a friend to express concern about where Caylee is. Instead, she goes to the apartment of her boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro, a 24-year-old student and club promoter who lives in the Vista del Lago apartment complex near the University of Central Florida campus. She stays there for days, sleeping in his bed, using his bathroom, eating meals in his kitchen. She goes to a Target store on Samaran Boulevard on June 18th and spends $138 on items including a pair of shorts, a skirt, and a 12-pack of beer. She rents movies from Blockbuster, Untraceable and Jumper, two films she and Lazzaro watched together in his apartment on the evening of June 16th, the same day Caylee is last seen alive. She goes to a nightclub called Fusion Ultra Lounge on June 20th and is photographed by the club's photographer. Images that will later be seen by millions of people, dancing, laughing, her arms around her boyfriend, her body pressed against his, her expression entirely at ease. She enters a hot body contest at the club. She wins. She tells her mother when Cindy calls and asks about Caylee that the little girl is with Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, a nanny, a woman Caylee has described to her family as a trusted caretaker who has been watching Caylee for some time, sometimes referred to in the family as Zani the nanny. Cindy accepts this uncomfortably because she has no reason yet to disbelieve it entirely, though the discomfort is growing. She asks to speak to Caylee on the phone. Casey tells her the little girl is asleep, or busy, or not available right now. She will call back later. She will have Caylee call in the morning. The morning comes, and the call does not. This goes on for 31 days. 31 days of text messages and phone calls and fabricated updates, of a grandmother asking about her granddaughter, and a mother constructing, in real time, an increasingly elaborate fiction about where that granddaughter is, and what she is doing, and when she will be home. The fiction requires constant maintenance. The beach trip has to become a theme park visit. The theme park visit has to become a stay at a friend's house. The friend's house has to become a trip to Tampa. Tampa has to become something else. Each new version has to be consistent with the previous one, and none of them can be verified. And Caylee Anthony is a nurse who has spent her career paying attention to things that don't add up. And by mid-July, the things that don't add up have become impossible to ignore. On July 15th, Caylee Anthony finally reaches a breaking point. She tracks Casey down through Tony Lazaro's apartment, through a series of phone calls, through the kind of determined maternal pursuit that does not stop until it finds what it is looking for and forces the issue in person. Casey, cornered in a way she has not been before, tells her mother something that shifts the entire situation. She says she hasn't actually seen Caylee in 31 days either, that the nanny, Zenaida, took her, that she doesn't know where Caylee is, that she has been trying to find her on her own, conducting her own private investigation, and has not wanted to worry anyone until she had more information. Caylee Anthony calls 911 at 7:52 p.m. Her first words to the dispatcher are about the smell in Casey's car, the car she has just retrieved, the white Pontiac, and the smell coming from the trunk that she recognizes and cannot bring herself to name directly. Then she calls again. Then Casey calls. And in that third call, something in Casey's voice strikes the dispatcher as unusual. Not the sound of a mother in terror, not the ragged, breathless quality of someone whose world has just collapsed, but something flatter, more measured, as if the emotion is being applied from the outside rather than generated from within. The dispatcher asks Casey directly, "Do you want us to send someone?" Casey says yes, but the way she says it is not the way a mother says it. Within hours, the Orange County Sheriff's Office has detectives at the house on Hope Spring Drive. The lead investigator assigned to the case is Yuri Melich, a seasoned Orange County Sheriff's detective who has worked missing persons cases before and who will later describe this one as unlike anything in his experience, not because of the evidence, but because of the person at the center of it. Melich is methodical and patient, and what he recognizes earlier than most of the people around him, is that the normal tools of a missing child investigation don't apply here, because the child's mother is not behaving like a mother whose child is missing. She is behaving like someone managing a story. And the difference between those two things, in Melich's experience, is not subtle. Within days, the name Caylee Anthony is known across the state of Florida. Within a week, it is known across the country. The photographs, the birthday party, the beach trip, the image of a small dark-haired girl with her whole face smiling, are everywhere. The story has every element that drives national media attention. A beautiful child, a young mother, a mystery that seems like it should be simple to solve and is not. The first investigators to work the case are confronted immediately with a problem that will define the entire investigation. Nothing Caylee Anthony tells them holds together for more than a few hours. She tells them Caylee is with Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez and gives investigators an address, the Sawgrass Apartments on South Conway Road. Detectives go to the Sawgrass Apartments. They locate a woman by that name who has a connection to the address. She has never met Caylee Anthony. She has never been a nanny for anyone. She has no connection to Caylee whatsoever. She will later sue Caylee Anthony for defamation, a lawsuit that will drag through the courts for years. Casey tells investigators she works at Universal Studios, and that Zenaida used to bring Caylee to meet her there. Detectives escort her to Universal Studios, not as a courtesy, but as an investigative technique to see what she does when the physical reality of the place confronts the story she has been telling. She walks them through the building with confidence, moving through the corridors with the ease of someone who knows where they are going, leading them toward what she says is her office. And then she stops. In a hallway with 3 law enforcement officers watching her, she tells them she doesn't actually work there. She hasn't worked there in years. She has just walked a team of investigators through a major theme park on the basis of a lie she maintained, until the physical reality of the building made it impossible to continue. Each time investigators think they have found a thread to pull, it leads not to Caylee, but to another layer of Casey's constructed reality. A world of invented jobs, invented friends, invented routines, all maintained with a fluency that the detectives find, by their own later accounts, genuinely disorienting. There is a friend named Juliette Lewis, who Casey describes in detail. There is no Juliette Lewis. There is a job at a sports bar called Fusion. There is no such job. There is a boyfriend named Jeff Hopkins, whose son, Zach, played with Caylee regularly. Jeff Hopkins exists, but he has a son named Zachary, not Zach, and Zachary has never met Caylee Anthony. The fabrications are not random. They are detailed, internally consistent for short periods, and delivered with a confidence that is itself a kind of evidence. This is not someone who lies occasionally and badly. This is someone who has been lying comprehensively and well for a very long time, and who, under the pressure of a criminal investigation, is simply doing what she has always done, constructing a version of reality that serves the moment and trusting that it will hold long enough to matter. It does not hold, but the damage it does to the investigation is real. Every hour spent chasing a non-existent nanny, a non-existent job, a non-existent friend, is an hour not spent finding Caylee. Melick and his team pivot. If Casey won't give them the truth directly, they will build a timeline from the physical evidence, phone records, cell tower data, credit card transactions, surveillance footage from gas stations and retail stores, and let that timeline speak for itself. What it says is damning. On June 16th, the day Caylee is last seen, Casey's phone pings cell towers, consistent with her being in the area of the Hope Spring drive home through the late afternoon. Then, in the early evening, the cell data places her in a different area, not where she claims to have been, not at any location consistent with the nanny story, but in a location that investigators note and document and cannot yet fully explain. On June 17th, she is at Tony Lazaro's apartment. Her phone activity is normal. Her behavior, by every account of the people who saw her that week, is entirely normal. The behavior of a young woman on a summer break, not the behavior of a mother in the middle of a private search for her missing child. But there is something else, something that the investigators almost miss in the early days, and that will become one of the most discussed pieces of physical evidence in the entire case. On June 18th, a car belonging to Caylee Anthony, a white 1998 Pontiac Sunfire, license plate 270-UHM, is found abandoned at an Amscot check cashing business on Goldenrod Road, near the Anthony family home. The car has been there for several days. A tow truck company impounds it. When George Anthony retrieves it from the Johnson's Wrecker Service tow yard on July 15th, the same afternoon that Cindy makes the 911 call, he notices something the moment the attendant opens the gate: a smell. He is a former law enforcement officer with years of experience in situations where bodies are present. He knows what that smell means. He has known what it means for a long time, and the knowing of it, in that moment, in that tow yard, standing next to a car that belongs to his daughter, is something he will describe in court testimony in terms that make the courtroom go quiet. The odor of human decomposition. Forensic analysts from the Orange County Sheriff's Office processed the car extensively over the following weeks. They find a stain in the trunk liner, a stain that, under certain testing conditions, produces results consistent with decomposition. They find chloroform compounds in the air sample taken from the trunk. They find a single strand of hair with a characteristic known as postmortem root banding, a phenomenon that occurs when hair continues to grow slightly after death, producing a distinct banding pattern at the root that is different from the pattern produced by a living person's hair. The hair is consistent in its characteristics with Caylee Anthony's hair. A cadaver dog, trained specifically to detect the scent of human decomposition, alerts to the trunk of the Pontiac on 2 separate occasions. The car becomes central to everything that follows. It is the first physical evidence that something has happened to Caylee, not an abduction by a stranger, not a nanny who took her somewhere, not a runaway story, but something that ended at some point inside that white Pontiac's trunk. The defense will spend years attacking every aspect of the forensic analysis of that car. The prosecution will spend years defending it. But in the summer of 2008, in the early weeks of the investigation, the car is the thing that tells Yuri Melich and his team that they are not looking for a living child anymore. By late July, the search for Caylee Anthony has expanded far beyond the capacity of law enforcement alone. Tens of thousands of volunteers mobilize across Central Florida, organized through a combination of official channels and the kind of grassroots coordination that the internet was making possible in ways that hadn't existed a decade earlier. A private investigator named Dominic Casey, no relation to the Anthony family, is hired by the defense team, then let go, then re-engaged under circumstances that are never fully explained, and whose activities during the search period will later become a subject of significant controversy. The organization Texas EquiSearch, led by Tim Miller, deploys trained searchers and equipment across Orange County. One of the areas they search in August and again in September of 2008 is a stretch of overgrown woodland off Suburban Drive, a short road less than a quarter mile from the Anthony home on Hope Spring Drive. The area is wet. It floods regularly in the Florida summer, when the afternoon thunderstorms come through daily and the ground doesn't drain quickly. The searchers walk through it. They find nothing. They mark it searched and move on. Caylee Anthony is arrested on July 16, 2008, one day after the 911 call, on charges of child neglect, filing false official statements, and obstruction of a criminal investigation. She bonds out within days, assisted by her parents, who are still publicly maintaining that they believe Casey's account and that Caylee is alive somewhere. She is arrested again in August on additional charges. She bonds out again, this time with the assistance of Leonard Padilla, a bail bondsman and bounty hunter from Sacramento, California, who has become publicly convinced that he can gain Casey's trust and get her to reveal where Caylee is. He cannot. She spends several days in the Hope Spring Drive house under his team's informal supervision, says nothing that leads anywhere, and Padilla withdraws his bond support in late August, concluding that she has no intention of cooperating. The months that follow are a strange, suspended period. A missing child case with no body, no confirmed crime scene, no physical evidence of what happened to Caylee after the afternoon of June 16th. Casey remains out on bond for a period, then is returned to custody after the bond is revoked. She sits in the Orange County Jail while her parents give interviews, while search teams comb Central Florida, while the national media builds a narrative around a case that has every element of a story people cannot stop watching. George and Cindy Anthony appear on morning shows and news magazines. They are a family in an impossible position, defending a daughter they may or may not believe, grieving a granddaughter whose fate they cannot yet know for certain, and doing all of it in front of cameras. On December 11, 2008, a utility worker named Roy Kronk is checking a water meter along a stretch of suburban drive, the same stretch of overgrown woods that Texas EquuSearch walked through in the summer. The area has dried out since the rainy season ended. Kronk notices a gray garbage bag in the underbrush, partially obscured by palmetto scrub and fallen branches. He notices something inside the bag. He calls 911 at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning. Orange County deputies respond. Within hours, forensic investigators are on scene. Caylee Marie Anthony's skeletal remains are found 19 houses from her grandparents' front door. The decomposition is advanced. She has been in the elements since sometime in the summer, through the heat of July and August, and the rains of September and October. A child-sized skull is found with duct tape in the area of the lower jaw. A Winnie the Pooh blanket, the kind sold at Target, is found near the remains. A laundry bag consistent with one owned by the Anthony family is found nearby. The duct tape itself, a specific brand, Henkel brand duct tape, is consistent with duct tape found in the Anthony home and in the trunk of the Pontiac. The cause of death, due to the advanced state of decomposition, cannot be definitively established by Dr. John Garavaglia, the Orange County Chief Medical Examiner. The manner of death is ruled a homicide, meaning someone caused this death, but the specific mechanism, the how of it, cannot be proven with the certainty that a medical examiner requires to put a cause of death on a death certificate. This gap between what the evidence suggests and what it can prove is the fault line along which the entire trial will eventually run. Caylee Anthony is indicted for first-degree murder on October 14, 2008, 2 months before Caylee's remains are even found. The grand jury acts on the totality of the circumstantial evidence available at that point. The decomposition in the trunk, the false statements, the 31 days, the behavioral evidence, the cell tower data. When the remains are discovered in December and the forensic analysis of the scene is completed over the following months, the charge stands. The state of Florida announces that it will seek the death penalty. The trial does not begin until May 24, 2011, nearly 3 years after Caylee's disappearance. The delay is the product of extensive pretrial proceedings, disputes over the admissibility of forensic evidence, challenges to the death penalty notice. The sheer logistical complexity of building a capital murder case on circumstantial evidence in a jurisdiction where every motion is contested and every ruling is appealed. The case is assigned to Judge Belvin Perry Jr., an experienced jurist known for his firm management of courtrooms and his tolerance for neither delay nor theatrics. The prosecution is led by Jeff Ashton, a veteran prosecutor with over 30 years of experience in the Orange County State Attorney's Office, and Linda Drain Burdick, equally experienced, who has spent years on cases involving crimes against children. Together, they have assembled what they believe is an overwhelming circumstantial case. Not a case with a single smoking gun, but a case where every piece of evidence points in the same direction, and where the accumulation of those pieces, taken together, leaves only one reasonable conclusion. The defense is led by Jose Baez, a Miami attorney who took on the case in 2008 and who has spent the intervening years building a defense strategy that is, by any measure, audacious. Baez is less experienced in capital cases than Ashton or Burdick, a fact the prosecution will attempt to use against him, and that will ultimately not matter in the way they expect. On the first day of trial, in a packed courtroom in downtown Orlando, with a jury of 12 selected from a pool of hundreds, the jury has been brought in from Pinellas County on the other side of the state, because finding an impartial jury in Orange County is considered impossible. Baez delivers an opening statement that reframes the entire case from its foundation. Caylee Anthony, Baez tells the jury, did not die at her mother's hands. She drowned in the family's backyard swimming pool on the morning of June 16, 2008. It was an accident. George Anthony, Baez claims, discovered the child's body in the pool, and rather than calling 911, rather than doing what any grandparent would do in that moment, he chose to conceal what had happened. He involved Casey in the concealment. He told her that her world would be over if anyone found out. In Casey, already conditioned by years of sexual abuse perpetrated by George Anthony himself, abuse that Baez claims began when Casey was 8 years old and continued into her adolescence, did not have the psychological framework to respond the way a person with a normal childhood would respond. She had learned from the time she was a child to keep secrets. She had learned that the adults in her life were not safe. And on the morning of June 16th, that learned behavior, that survival mechanism, is what took over. The courtroom is quiet for a long moment after Baez finishes. It is an extraordinary claim, and it does something that the prosecution does not anticipate with full clarity until the opening statement is already over. It reorients every piece of evidence in the case. The 31 days which the prosecution sees as evidence of a guilty conscience become, in Baez's framing, evidence of trauma. The dancing at fusion, which the prosecution sees as callousness, becomes dissociation. The lies, which the prosecution sees as the behavior of someone covering a crime, become the behavior of someone who has spent her entire life covering things that were not her fault. The duct tape, the car, the decomposition, all of it gets filtered through the lens of a cover-up that Casey participated in but did not initiate. If the jury believes it, Caylee Anthony walks free. If they don't, and the prosecution's case is as strong as Ashton and Burdick believe it to be, she faces lethal injection. The prosecution's case rests on 5 central pillars. The first is the smell of decomposition in the trunk of the Pontiac, supported by George Anthony's testimony, the cadaver dog alerts, and the forensic air sample analysis. The second is the physical evidence from the trunk liner, the stain, the hair, the chloroform compounds. The third is the computer search evidence. Searches conducted on the Anthony family's home computer for terms including chloroform, how to make chloroform, neck breaking, and death. The initial forensic report, prepared by a sheriff's office analyst named Sandra Osborne, indicates that the term chloroform was searched 84 times on the family computer. This number, if true, suggests premeditation in a way that is difficult to explain away. The fourth pillar is the duct tape, the specific brand, the location near the skull, the connection to the Anthony home. The fifth is the behavioral evidence, 31 days of documented lying, spending, dancing, and apparent normalcy in the face of a missing child, which the prosecution argues is simply not consistent with any innocent explanation. The defense attacks each pillar with a methodical patience that surprises some observers. The decomposition smell. Baez argues it could have come from a bag of garbage Casey left in the trunk, a not implausible explanation in a Florida summer where organic material decomposes rapidly. The hair evidence, the defense brings in experts who challenge the reliability of post-mortem root banding as a forensic indicator, arguing that the science is not settled and that the characteristic can appear in hair from living people under certain conditions. The computer search evidence, and here the defense gets unexpected help. A software developer named John Bradley, who created the forensic tool used to analyze the Anthony computer, reviews the evidence and concludes that the original analysis was wrong. The term chloroform was not searched 84 times. It was searched once, a single search, not a pattern of premeditation. Bradley notifies the prosecution. The prosecution notifies the defense. The correction is made, but the damage to the prosecution's narrative, the image of someone methodically researching a method of killing, is significant. The duct tape, the defense argues there is no forensic evidence that the tape was applied to Caylee's face before death, and that it could have been deposited at the scene at any point during the months the remains were in the woods, possibly even by animals disturbing the site. The behavioral evidence, the defense does not try to explain it away. Instead, they argue that it is consistent with the behavior of someone who has experienced severe childhood trauma, someone who learned early that the appropriate response to crisis is to perform normalcy and wait for someone else to manage the situation. The trial lasts 6 weeks. 90 witnesses take the stand. Hundreds of pieces of evidence are entered into the record. The forensic testimony is dense and technical, and at several critical points, actively contested between prosecution and defense experts who examine the same physical evidence and arrive at diametrically opposed conclusions. The jury, 7 women and 5 men, none of whom are from Orange County, none of whom have followed the case closely, sits through all of it with the particular focused patience of people who understand that what they decide in that room will matter in ways they cannot fully anticipate. George Anthony takes the stand and is cross-examined by Baez in one of the trial's most charged sequences. He denies under oath that Caylee drowned in the pool. He denies under oath that he discovered her body and concealed her death. He denies under oath the abuse allegations flatly, without qualification, with what appears to be genuine anguish. He is a man visibly destroyed by what has happened to his family, his granddaughter dead, his daughter on trial for her murder, his marriage under a strain that has become visible to anyone watching, and his testimony carries an emotional weight that is difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. Caylee Anthony takes the stand and testifies about the computer searches. She says she was the one who searched for chloroform on the home computer, that she had been looking up information about the effects of chlorophyll on plants, and that a search result led her to information about chloroform, which she then looked at. It is testimony that, if believed, eliminates the most damaging element of the prosecution's digital evidence. It is also testimony that is later contradicted by records from Cindy's employer, Gentiva Health Services, which indicate that she was at work on the days in question, not at home on the family computer. Whether she is lying to protect her daughter, or whether the employment records are incomplete, is never definitively resolved. On July 5, 2011, after deliberating for 10 hours and 45 minutes across 2 days, the jury returns to the courtroom at the Orange County Courthouse. The verdict is read at 2:15 in the afternoon. Not guilty of first-degree murder. Not guilty of aggravated child abuse. Not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child. Guilty on 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The reaction outside the courthouse is immediate. People who have gathered on the plaza in the July heat react with open disbelief and anger. Across every major television network, legal analysts who have spent 6 weeks discussing the evidence struggle to reconcile what they expected with what has just happened. Social media, still relatively new as a vehicle for collective public response, but already powerful enough to make a verdict feel like a national event, erupts with a volume and intensity that few cases had produced before. Caylee Anthony becomes, within hours of the verdict, one of the most hated private citizens in the United States. Not a public figure, not a politician, not a celebrity in any conventional sense, a 25-year-old woman from a suburb of Orlando, whose name has become, for millions of people, synonymous with a specific kind of injustice. The jury, when individual members speak to reporters in the days following the verdict, explains their reasoning in terms that are legally coherent, even if they are emotionally unsatisfying. The prosecution, they say, did not prove how Caylee died. Without establishing the cause of death, they could not find Caylee guilty of causing it. The circumstantial case was strong. Several jurors acknowledged this directly. But strong is not the same as beyond a reasonable doubt. And the reasonable doubt was there. In the revised chloroform search number, in the contested decomposition evidence, in the ambiguity surrounding the duct tape, in the defense's accident theory, which the jury could not disprove even if they could not fully believe it. One juror later says that she cried after the verdict, not because she thought Caylee was innocent, but because the law required her to vote the way she voted, and she understood the difference between what she believed and what she could prove. On July 17, 2011, Caylee Anthony is sentenced to 4 years on the lying charges, with credit for time served since her 2008 arrest. She has spent nearly 3 years in the Orange County Jail. She has served her time. She is released that same day, escorted out of the facility in the early morning hours to avoid the crowds that have gathered outside. She is 25 years old. She walks out of the Orange County Jail at 12:11 in the morning into a Florida night that is warm and humid and very dark, and she disappears from public view almost immediately. In the years that follow, Caylee Anthony lives in a way that is deliberately obscured from public scrutiny. In Florida, by various accounts, under arrangements that are not publicly disclosed, in a situation that requires a level of anonymity that few people in the modern United States ever have reason to seek. She gives occasional interviews, the most substantive of which comes in 2017, when she speaks at length with the Associated Press and maintains, as she has consistently maintained since 2008, that she does not know what happened to Caylee. In that interview, she expresses something that reads more like detachment than grief. a flatness of affect when discussing her daughter that the people who watch it find as troubling as anything that came before. The public reaction is largely the same as it has always been. The case has not faded in the way that some cases fade. It has calcified instead into a fixed point in the American cultural memory, a case that people who were alive in 2011 remember exactly where they were when the verdict was read. Jose Baez goes on to a successful legal career, representing other high-profile clients, including Aaron Hernandez, the former NFL player convicted of murder, and Harvey Weinstein in certain proceedings. Jeff Ashton, the lead prosecutor, writes a book about the case titled Imperfect Justice, and later serves 2 terms as state attorney for Orange County before losing a re-election bid in 2020. Yuri Melich, the lead detective, continues to work as an investigator and has spoken about the case in interviews over the years, consistently maintaining that the evidence pointed to Caylee Anthony and that the verdict, while legal, was not just. George and Cindy Anthony, whose marriage survived the trial and everything surrounding it, a survival that is itself remarkable given what they endured, have spoken publicly about their grief and their faith, and have established the Caylee Marie Anthony Foundation in their granddaughter's name. Their relationship with Caylee, by all available accounts, remains complicated in ways that are probably beyond the capacity of any public statement to fully convey. Roy Kronk, the utility worker who found Caylee's remains on the morning of December 11th, 2008, and whose call to 911 ended the search, received no reward money despite being the person directly responsible for the discovery. The circumstances of how Caylee ended up in those woods, who placed her there, when exactly, and under what conditions, have never been legally established. The defense suggested during trial that Kronk himself may have moved the remains. No evidence supporting this claim was ever produced. It remains, like so much else in this case, an allegation without resolution. Caylee Marie Anthony would be 19 years old today. She is buried in an undisclosed location because her grandparents made the decision after the trial that a marked grave would become a target for people whose feelings about the case had nowhere else to go. There is no headstone. There is no public place to leave flowers. What the Caylee Anthony case leaves behind is not a solved mystery. It is something more uncomfortable than that. A case where the legal system functioned exactly as it was designed to function, where the burden of proof was applied with the precision the Constitution requires, and where the outcome was one that a significant portion of the American public found not just wrong, but morally intolerable. It raised questions that are still being debated in law schools and journalism programs and true crime communities more than a decade later, about what circumstantial evidence can and cannot prove, about how behavioral evidence is weighted by juries, about the relationship between public opinion and legal truth, about what it means to know something in your bones without being able to prove it in a courtroom. The 31 days remain the center of everything. Every theory about what happened to Caylee Anthony, every version of events, every alternative explanation, every attempt to make sense of the evidence has to pass through those 31 days, has to account for what a mother was doing and thinking and choosing while her daughter was gone. The accident theory accounts for them one way, the prosecution's theory accounts for them another, and the jury, faced with 2 competing accounts of the same 31 days, found that neither had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Caylee's remains were found less than a quarter mile from the house where she was born. She was 2 years old when she was last seen alive. She was 2 years old when she died. And the exact circumstances of her death, the thing that every investigator, every prosecutor, every juror, every person who followed this case wanted most to know, remain officially unknown. If this case stayed with you, the questions it raises, the evidence that never quite resolved, the verdict that still divides people who followed every moment of it, there is another case waiting on this channel that operates on the same kind of fault line. A case built entirely on circumstantial evidence, a conviction that took decades to secure, and a family that never stopped asking the question that the system kept refusing to answer. It is there when you are ready for it.